I am Isabella Mitchell, 28, and I just watched my parents burn $9 million in front of my eyes. Grandpa Harold raised me with more love than my parents ever showed, and now, he was gone. When his lawyer handed me that check during the will, reading my father and mother snatched it away, lit it on fire, and thought they had won. But I just smiled. They had no idea what Grandpa and I had planned all along. Before I tell you what really happened in that attorney office, let me know where you are watching from. Hit that like button and subscribe if you have ever dealt with toxic family members. My grandfather Harold Mitchell was not just my father Richard's dad, he was my hero. From the earliest memories of my childhood, Grandpa Harold filled the emotional void my parents left with their constant pursuit of status and money. While they attended cocktail parties and networked with the elite, I spent weekends at Grandpa's sprawling Victorian house, learning about life integrity and the value of honest work. Grandpa built his fortune from nothing. The son of a coal miner from Pennsylvania, he started a small construction company in his 20s that eventually grew into Mitchell Enterprises, a diversified business empire spanning real estate manufacturing and technology investments. But unlike my parents, money never changed who he was at his core. "Bella," he would say, while teaching me to fish at the lake behind his property, "remember that your bank account doesn't define your worth. Your actions do." This lesson came as we caught fish to donate to the local shelter rather than keeping them for ourselves. I was only 10, but those words anchored themselves in my soul. Every Sunday, after my 13th birthday, I would ride my bike 8 miles to his house regardless of weather. We would bake bread together, his mother's recipe, and he would tell stories about his life while the dough rose. My father found this ritual ridiculous. What could possibly be gained from wasting time baking when you could be networking or learning something valuable, he once demanded. I never told him that those hours in Grandpa's kitchen taught me more about business ethics and human dignity than all the private schools they sent me to. As I grew older, my parents' relationship with Grandpa deteriorated further. Their visits became less frequent, happening only when they needed something. Usually, money. Grandpa saw through their transparent attempts at manipulation. During one particularly tense Thanksgiving dinner, my father demanded an early inheritance to buy into an exclusive country club membership. Grandpa refused, suggesting he earn it himself. "You forgot what it means to work for something," Richard, Grandpa said calmly. "And that is my greatest failure as a father." The room fell silent. My mother Eleanor clutched her pearls dramatically, while my father stormed out. I stayed behind helping Grandpa clean up after they left. We never spoke about the incident directly, but something shifted that night. Grandpa began sharing more about his business with me, asking my opinions, and teaching me about his decision-making process. By the time I finished college, I had disappointed my parents by becoming a third-grade teacher instead of pursuing law or business as they demanded. The modest salary I earned teaching at Lincoln Elementary made my father practically disown me. "We did not spend $200,000 on your education for you to babysit other people's brats," he sneered when I showed him my first classroom. Grandpa, however, showed up on my first day with 30 handmade pencil boxes he had crafted himself, one for each student. He attended every school play and concert when my parents were too busy. When the school faced budget cuts, an anonymous donation saved the art program I had fought to preserve. I never could prove it was him, but the knowing wink he gave me at Christmas told me everything. When Grandpa turned 85, his health began to decline. I moved into his guest house to help care for him despite my parents' objections that I was fortune hunting. The truth was, those 3 years caring for him were precious. We watched old Western movies, played chess, and continued our Sunday baking tradition, even when his hands became too shaky to knead the dough properly. During those quiet evenings, Grandpa often reflected on his life with surprising candor. "I made mistakes with your father, Bella," he admitted one night, as we sat on his porch watching fireflies. "I was building the business when he was young, too busy, too driven. By the time I realized what mattered, He had already learned the wrong lessons about money. He squeezed my hand with surprising strength for a man his age. "But you, my girl, you understood naturally what took me decades to learn. That is why I rest easy about what comes next." At the time, I thought he meant heaven. I did not realize he was planning something else entirely. The last 6 months of Grandpa's life, my parents suddenly reappeared with suspicious frequency. They brought expensive gifts he never asked for, and reminisced about family memories that never happened. Grandpa would play along, then roll his eyes at me when they left. Vultures circling, he would mutter, not unkindly, just stating a fact. During his final week, Grandpa asked for private time with his attorney Raymond Daniels, an old friend who had handled his legal affairs for decades. When Mr. Daniels left, he patted my shoulder with a cryptic, "Your grandfather is a wise man, Isabella. Remember that in the difficult days ahead." 3 weeks before the will reading, Grandpa passed peacefully in his sleep with me holding his hand. My parents arrived 2 hours after I called them, immediately beginning to inventory his possessions, while I sat numbly by his bed, still processing my grief. When Eleanor suggested we should check his safe for the good jewelry before the help gets ideas, I finally asked them to leave. The divide between us had never felt so vast. While I mourned the man who taught me to fish and bake bread and recognize my own worth, they calculated their expected windfall. Looking back, I should have anticipated what would happen next, but grief has a way of clouding even the clearest judgment. The day of the will reading arrived with ominous storm clouds gathering outside the tall windows of Raymond Daniels' downtown law office. The room filled slowly with relatives. I barely recognized distant cousins and obscure family connections who materialized only now that Harold Mitchell's considerable fortune was up for distribution. My parents arrived last deliberately late, in a power move meant to signal their importance. My father wore an expensive new suit, and my mother had her hair freshly colored and styled. They chose seats directly across from Mr. Daniels' imposing mahogany desk, pointedly ignoring me in the corner. Their confidence was palpable, bordering on smugness. After all, Richard was Harold's only child. In their minds, the bulk of the estate was already theirs. Raymond Daniels, a dignified man in his 70s, with silver hair and wire-rimmed glasses, watched this theatrical entrance with the passive expression of someone who had witnessed too many family dramas to be impressed. He nodded politely as my parents settled in, then cleared his throat to begin the proceedings. "Thank you all for coming today," he began, his voice steady and professional. "As executor of Harold Mitchell's estate, it is my duty to distribute his assets according to his final wishes. Harold was very specific about his desires, having revised this will just 6 months ago, with sound mind and full legal capacity." My father shifted impatiently, checking his Rolex. My mother's smile remained fixed, her eyes calculating. Mr. Daniels began with smaller bequests, $10,000 to Harold's longtime housekeeper Maria, $25,000 to his gardener Franklin, who had tended his property for decades, donations to various charities Harold had supported throughout his life. With each announcement, my parents' expressions soured slightly. Every dollar to someone else was one less for them. "To my niece Abigail Wilson I leave my summer cabin in Vermont, and $100,000, Mr. Daniels continued, nodding toward a cousin I vaguely remembered meeting at family reunions years ago. "To St. Jude Children's Hospital I leave $5 million for the establishment of a research wing in memory of my late wife Margaret." My mother gasped audibly at this. $5 million was serious money even to them. My father's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure, clearly still confident that the bulk of the estate, the business interests, primary properties, and investment portfolios would come to him. The remaining bequests concern the primary assets of Harold Mitchell. Mr. Daniels announced, adjusting his glasses. The room grew silent. "Regarding Mitchell Enterprises and all associated business holdings, real estate portfolios, stock investments, and liquid assets currently held in the Mitchell Family Trust." My father leaned forward unconsciously, practically salivating. These assets, with a current market valuation of approximately $50 million, are to be distributed as follows. Mr. Daniels paused, taking a sip of water before continuing. I felt my heart racing not from anticipation of wealth, but from knowing how explosive the next moments would be. To my son Richard Mitchell and his wife Eleanor, I leave the sum of $100,000 and my collection of fishing equipment which Richard never learned to appreciate. The silence in the room was deafening. My father's face flushed deep crimson. My mother's mouth opened and closed wordlessly like a fish out of water. Before either could recover enough to speak, Mr. Daniels continued. To my beloved granddaughter Isabella Mitchell, who understood the true value of family and showed me kindness without expectation of reward, I leave the sum of $9 million to be delivered immediately by cashier's check. Mr. Daniels reached into a folder and withdrew an official bank check with my name printed on it. The amount $9 million seemed surreal, the zeros blurring before my eyes. Additionally, Mr. Daniels continued, but was interrupted as my father suddenly stood his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. "This is outrageous," he bellowed, his face contorted with rage. "She manipulated him when he was old and vulnerable. This will is a fraud." Mr. Daniels remained calm. Richard I personally witnessed Harold's mental competency. He was of sound mind, and— "Liar!" my mother shrieked, jumping to her feet. "She turned him against us. His own son." The room erupted in murmurs as relatives processed the shocking turn of events. Mr. Daniels attempted to restore order, but my parents were beyond reason. As he approached me with the check in hand, my father lunged across the room with surprising speed. "You ungrateful little snake," he snarled, ripping the check from my hands before I could even process what was happening. "You think you can steal what rightfully belongs to us?" My mother fumbled in her designer purse, producing a gold lighter, the one she used for her occasional cigarettes at parties. "This is what you get for cutting us off from him," she hissed, flicking the lighter to produce a flame. Everything seemed to move in slow motion as my father held the check to the flame. The paper caught quickly, curling and blackening at the edges. "No inheritance for you," he sneered, dropping the burning check into a metal wastebasket where it continued to smolder. The room exploded in chaos. Relatives gasped and shouted. Mr. Daniels tried to intervene but stopped short when he saw my face, because instead of crying or screaming as everyone expected, I was smiling. My calm reaction confused everyone, especially my parents. Their moment of triumph faltered as uncertainty crept into their expressions. "Why are you smiling?" my father demanded, suddenly suspicious. I said nothing, maintaining my composed demeanor as I rose from my seat. Mr. Daniels made a move toward me, concern evident in his eyes, but I subtly shook my head. He understood immediately and stepped back. "You burned the check," I said quietly, addressing my parents. "If that makes you happy, so be it." "Isabella, we should discuss," Mr. Daniels began, but I gently interrupted. "Not now, Mr. Daniels. I think we are done here." The confusion in the room was palpable as I gathered my belongings and walked calmly toward the door. Behind me, I could hear my parents' triumphant whispers, believing they had successfully thwarted Grandpa's wishes and reclaimed what they saw as their rightful inheritance. If only they knew what that burned check really meant. If only they understood what Grandpa had actually planned. But they would learn soon enough. The aftermath of the will reading unfolded exactly as I had anticipated. My parents wasted no time celebrating their perceived victory, calling family members to gloat about how they had protected the family legacy from my manipulative clutches. Their version of events spread through our extended family like wildfire. Poor Richard and Eleanor, nearly robbed of their rightful inheritance by their scheming daughter who had isolated Harold in his final years. By the next morning, my phone overflowed with accusatory text messages and voicemails from relatives I barely knew. "How could you take advantage of a dying old man?" wrote my father's cousin Meredith, who had visited Grandpa exactly twice in the past decade. "You should be ashamed of yourself," declared Uncle Peter, who had once asked Grandpa for a $50,000 loan he never repaid. The most painful message came from my Aunt Judith, my father's sister, with whom I had always felt a connection. "I always thought better of you, Isabella. Your grandfather would be disappointed in what you've become." That one stung because Aunt Judith had witnessed my childhood devotion to Grandpa. She had seen me ride my bike through rainstorms to visit him, had watched me tend to him when he was ill. Her willingness to believe the worst of me revealed how effectively my parents had poisoned the family against me. The only person who stood firmly in my corner was my best friend Cassandra Taylor Cassie, who had known me since 6th grade and had spent countless weekends at Grandpa's house with me. "Your family is certifiable," she declared, when I showed her the barrage of messages. "These people ignored Harold for years, and now they are outraged on his behalf. The hypocrisy is breathtaking." Cassie urged me to fight back, to tell everyone about how my parents had literally burned my inheritance in front of witnesses, but something held me back. Perhaps it was Grandpa's voice in my head reminding me that reacting to cruelty with more conflict rarely solves anything. Instead, I focused on processing my grief over losing Grandpa, while continuing my work at Lincoln Elementary, where my 3rd graders provided a welcome distraction from family drama. I took a temporary leave from the guest house on Grandpa's property, now technically owned by some unknown entity, until the estate was settled, and moved in with Cassie until I could find a new apartment. 3 days after the will reading, my father called. This was unusual enough to make me answer despite my better judgment. "Isabella," he began with forced pleasantness, "your mother and I feel terrible about how things escalated at the attorney's office." "Do you?" I replied neutrally, waiting for the real purpose of his call. "We were emotional," he continued. "Grief affects people in strange ways." "It certainly does." A brief silence followed before he came to his point. "We are willing to put this unfortunate episode behind us. Families should stick together in difficult times." Translation: They wanted access to Grandpa's house to continue inventorying valuables before the estate was settled. I had the keys and the security system codes, and they did not. "I appreciate the sentiment, Dad," I replied carefully. "But I think some time apart might be best for all of us." His tone instantly hardened. "This stubbornness is childish, Isabella. We are your parents. You owe us respect." "Respect is earned," I said quietly, thinking of Grandpa's patient lessons on self-worth. "And you burned mine in that wastebasket." I ended the call as he began shouting threats about contesting the will and exposing my manipulation of Grandpa. That night, I made the difficult decision to block both my parents' numbers and any relatives who had sent abusive messages. The weight that lifted from my shoulders confirmed it was the right choice. The next few weeks brought escalating pressure. My parents began showing up at Lincoln Elementary, forcing me to ask the school administration to enforce visitor protocols. They left notes on my car and attempted to ambush me at the grocery store. Each encounter featured the same toxic mixture of accusations, gaslighting, and veiled threats. "We just want what your grandfather would have wanted," my mother insisted during one unplanned confrontation outside my classroom. "We can work together on this, Isabella. Why are you being so difficult?" The campaign expanded to social media, where my mother posted thinly veiled references to elder abuse and family betrayal that mutual connections understood were about me. Former family friends chose sides most aligning with my parents, whose social capital and networking skills had always ensured loyalty in their circles. By the 1-month mark after Grandpa's will reading, I had lost 15 pounds from stress and barely slept through the night. The emotional toll of being villainized by my entire family dredged up childhood wounds I thought long healed. Memories resurfaced of similar patterns, my parents manipulating situations, recasting themselves as victims, and isolating me when I failed to comply with their narrative. Through it all, I maintained my silence about what really happened at the will reading, partly because dignity demanded it and partly because something in me trusted Grandpa's process, however mysterious it remained. He had taught me that character reveals itself in time. I was witnessing that truth unfold in spectacular fashion. Meanwhile, my parents flaunted their apparent victory. They began renovating Grandpa's house without clear legal authority to do so, hosted parties for their social circle, and even gave an interview to the local newspaper about continuing the Mitchell legacy. The article mentioned their plans to sell off parts of Mitchell Enterprises to finance a luxury retirement community development, something Grandpa had specifically opposed because it would require displacing a historic Black neighborhood. Their behavior confirmed everything Grandpa had feared about their stewardship of his life's work. They viewed his empire as merely a resource to be exploited, rather than a responsibility to the community he had helped build. 6 weeks after the will reading, I noticed a silver sedan parked across from my new apartment building 3 days in a row. On the 4th day, I spotted my father's personal assistant Lawrence, behind the wheel, poorly disguised in sunglasses and a baseball cap. They were having me followed. That same evening, I received an unexpected phone call from Raymond Daniels. "Isabella," he said, his voice low and serious, "I believe it's time we continued our discussion about your grandfather's estate. Could you come to my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock before regular hours? Use the service entrance if you don't mind." His tone conveyed volumes. Something significant was happening. "I'll be there, Mr. Daniels," I promised, a flutter of anticipation rising in my chest. "And Isabella," he added, "just before hanging up, you might want to make sure you're not followed." The next morning, I left my apartment at 5:30 hours before my usual departure time. After a circuitous route involving 2 bus transfers and a half-mile walk through a shopping mall, I was confident no one was tracking me. I arrived at the service entrance of Daniels Legal Services precisely at 9, where the elderly attorney himself opened the door, rather than his usual receptionist. "Thank you for your discretion," he said, ushering me through the back corridors of the office building. We bypassed the main conference room, where the will reading had occurred, and entered a smaller, more secure room I had never seen before. The walls were lined with file cabinets, and a sophisticated security system required Mr. Daniels' fingerprint to unlock the door. Once seated at a small table, Mr. Daniels removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose tiredly. "Isabella, what I am about to share with you was arranged by your grandfather, with explicit timing instructions. Harold was many things, but foremost he was a man who understood human nature and planned accordingly." He opened a thick file folder stamped with "Confidential" and removed several documents. "The check that your parents destroyed 6 weeks ago was in fact completely symbolic." My breath caught in my throat. Symbolic. Mr. Daniels allowed himself a small smile. Harold anticipated with remarkable accuracy, I might add, exactly how Richard and Eleanor might react if they felt disadvantaged by his will. "The check was real, in the sense that it was a valid financial instrument, but it was never the actual mechanism for your inheritance." He slid a document across the table. "This is the Harold Mitchell Family Trust, established 18 months ago. You are the sole beneficiary, and have been since its creation. The $9 million mentioned in the will was transferred into this trust long before Harold's passing, along with much more." My hands trembled as I scanned the legal language. Much more. "Isabella, your grandfather left you significantly more than was revealed at the will reading. The $9 million check was merely what he called the character test, a way to see how various family members would respond when faced with unexpected circumstances." Mr. Daniels handed me another document, this one detailing the full extent of my inheritance. The numbers made me dizzy. $58 million in total assets, Mr. Daniels explained gently, including controlling interest in Mitchell Enterprises, the main residence, 4 commercial properties in downtown, the summer house in Maine, and investment portfolios. Everything except the small bequests mentioned at the reading. I struggled to process this information. But why the charade? Why not just say this at the will reading? Mr. Daniels leaned back in his chair. "Your grandfather and I had many discussions about this approach. He was concerned about 2 things. First, that Richard would contest the will if he knew the full extent of his disinheritance, potentially dragging you through years of ugly litigation. Second, and more importantly to Harold, he wanted to protect you. Protect me. From the burden of sudden wealth, without seeing clearly who might try to exploit you for it, Harold believed that true character reveals itself in moments of crisis. He wanted you to see beyond any doubt who stood by you for yourself alone. A memory surfaced Grandpa and me, sitting on his porch swing during my senior year of college, discussing my future. The most valuable gift I can give you, he had said, is the ability to recognize the difference between those who love you and those who love what you can give them. At the time, I thought he was speaking philosophically. Now I understood he had been planning this all along. There's more, Mr. Daniels continued, interrupting my thoughts. He withdrew an envelope sealed with wax, imprinted with Grandpa's distinctive monogram. Harold left strict instructions that this letter was to be given to you 6 weeks after the will, reading not before. My name was written on the front in Grandpa's shaky handwriting. I broke the seal carefully and unfolded the pages inside. My dearest Bella, if you are reading this, then several things have happened. I have passed on from this world. My will has been read, and Raymond has determined it is now safe to reveal the full truth to you. I suspect that by now, you have witnessed the true nature of your parents' regard for you and for me. This grieves me deeply, but it does not surprise me. Richard has spent his life valuing money over relationships, a flaw I failed to correct in his upbringing. What you may not know is that 3 years ago, Richard approached me with a business proposal that would have dismantled everything I built and harmed many people who have depended on Mitchell Enterprises for their livelihoods. When I refused, he and Eleanor attempted to have me declared mentally incompetent to manage my affairs. Their petition failed, but it revealed their intentions with painful clarity. I tell you this not to deepen the rift between you and your parents, but to explain why I felt compelled to protect my legacy and you from their influence. You, my dear granddaughter, have shown me what Richard never could, that a life of purpose must be anchored in compassion rather than acquisition. The check that was presented at my will reading was what I call a character test. Those who rejoiced in your good fortune passed. Those who resented it failed. Those who attempted to steal it revealed themselves completely. The trust that now belongs to you has strict conditions designed to protect both you and the 317 families employed by our various businesses. Raymond will explain these in detail, but know that I have arranged for experienced advisors to guide you until you feel confident in your decisions. I do not ask you to forgive your parents. That is your choice alone. I ask only that you remember the lessons we discussed on those Sunday afternoons, that wealth is a responsibility, not a privilege, that character matters more than appearance, and that the truest inheritance I could leave you was never money, but wisdom. Lead with integrity, my Bella. I am proud of the woman you have become and have complete faith in the choices you will make. With eternal love, your Grandpa Harold. By the time I finished reading, tears streamed down my face. Mr. Daniels respectfully busied himself with other documents, allowing me privacy to collect myself. He knew, I finally whispered. He knew exactly what they would do. Harold was an exceptional judge of character, Mr. Daniels confirmed. But even he was surprised by the lengths to which your parents went. Physically destroying the check was more dramatic than we anticipated. What happens now? I asked, still reeling from these revelations. That depends entirely on you, Isabella. As of this moment, you control Mitchell Enterprises and all associated assets. The company's executive team has been operating under interim leadership, awaiting your decisions. The responsibility felt overwhelming. I was a third-grade teacher, not a business mogul. Sensing my anxiety, Mr. Daniels smiled reassuringly. Your grandfather anticipated your concerns. He arranged for a management team to handle day-to-day operations until you feel ready to take a more active role. Nothing requires immediate decisions. He paused, then added with uncharacteristic emotion, Harold had tremendous faith in you, Isabella. Over our 40-year friendship, I never saw him more certain of anything than he was of your capacity to handle this responsibility. For the first time since Grandpa's death, I felt the full weight of his absence and the magnitude of his trust in me. The inheritance wasn't just wealth, it was his life's work and the values he had tried to instill in me. My parents, I said slowly, they have no idea, do they? None whatsoever, Mr. Daniels confirmed. They believe they successfully prevented your inheritance by destroying that check. They have been operating under the assumption that the estate remains in legal limbo. And the renovations they've started on Grandpa's house, they're plans for the company. Without legal authority, all actions taken regarding any Mitchell property or business interests, since Harold's passing, are subject to your approval as the rightful owner. A plan began forming in my mind, not motivated by revenge but by a desire for truth and closure. Mr. Daniels, I need your help with something. The attorney leaned forward, his expression serious, but with a glint of anticipation in his eyes. I had a feeling you might. What did you have in mind? 3 days later, I stood in the grand foyer of Grandpa's Victorian mansion, now legally my home, and surveyed the changes my parents had already implemented. The antique grandfather clock Grandpa loved had been replaced by a modern monstrosity of chrome and glass. His comfortable leather armchairs had vanished, substituted with angular furniture that prioritized appearance over comfort. It was a physical manifestation of everything Grandpa had resisted: style, without substance; newness, without heritage. Behind me, a small team assembled discreetly: Raymond Daniels, Sophia Bennett, the newly appointed CFO of Mitchell Enterprises, Maria Lopez, Grandpa's housekeeper of 20 years, and 2 security professionals recommended by Mr. Daniels. Everyone understood their roles in what would unfold. They just confirmed their coming, Maria reported, putting down her phone. Mrs. Eleanor sounded very pleased that you finally came to your senses and wanted to discuss family unity. I nodded, trying to calm my racing heart. Thank you all for being here. This isn't about revenge. It's about truth and protecting what Grandpa built. At precisely 7 o'clock, the doorbell rang. Maria opened it to reveal my parents dressed as if attending a victory celebration. My mother wore an expensive new dress, and my father carried a bottle of champagne. Isabella, darling. My mother's false warmth could have melted steel. She attempted to embrace me, but I stepped back subtly. Please come in, I said coolly. Dinner is set up in the dining room. Their eyes darted around, taking inventory of the changes they had made to the house, clearly pleased with themselves. They followed me through the foyer, my father already launching into his prepared speech. I'm glad you've reconsidered your position, Isabella. Family disagreements can be so unpleasant, but in the end, blood is thicker than water. The dining room doorway revealed our assembled group, waiting around the massive oak table where Grandpa had hosted countless family meals. My parents froze at the threshold, their expressions shifting from confidence to confusion. What is this? My father demanded, recognizing Mr. Daniels immediately. Why is he here? Please take a seat, I gestured to 2 chairs at the far end of the table. We have much to discuss. Reluctantly, they sat, placing the champagne bottle on the table like a shield. My mother's smile had vanished completely. Richard Eleanor I began formally 6 weeks ago at the will reading. You made a choice. You physically destroyed what you believed was my inheritance from Grandpa Harold. Now, Isabella, my father interrupted, that was an emotional moment for everyone. Surely we can move past. I raised my hand, silencing him, a power dynamic he clearly found unsettling. I'm not finished. Your actions that day revealed your true characters exactly as Grandpa intended. My mother's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What do you mean, as he intended? Mr. Daniels slid a folder across the table. This is a copy of the Harold Mitchell Family Trust established 18 months ago, with Isabella as the sole beneficiary. The check presented at the will reading was merely symbolic, a test, if you will. My father snatched the document, scanning it with increasing agitation. This can't be legal. I'll contest it. You'll lose, Mr. Daniels stated flatly. Harold was of sound mind, thoroughly documented by 3 independent psychiatric evaluations, a precaution he took after your attempt to have him declared incompetent 3 years ago. My mother gasped audibly. You knew about that. Grandpa told me everything I confirmed, including your plans to dismantle his company and sell off the assets. Miss Bennett, the CFO, spoke up. Mitchell Enterprises employs over 300 families, many of whom have worked for the company for generations. Mr. Mitchell's ethical business practices have been central to our success. My father's face had turned an alarming shade of red. This is ridiculous. We are his family. And family was everything to Grandpa, I agreed. That's why he wanted to ensure his legacy went to someone who shared his values. I reached into my pocket and withdrew my phone, placing it on the table between us. After the will reading, I began recording our interactions. I have documented evidence of your threats, your attempts to intimidate me, and most importantly, your own admissions about destroying what you believed was my inheritance. I pressed play on a selected recording. My father's voice filled the room. We did you a favor burning that check, you ungrateful brat. Now the money stays where it belongs with us. My mother looked stricken. You recorded us. Your own parents. Massachusetts is a 2-party consent state for recordings, Mr. Daniels interjected smoothly. However, these particular statements were made in public places, where there is no expectation of privacy. They would be admissible if this matter were to proceed to litigation, which could include charges of attempted theft and destruction of financial instruments. The security professionals shifted slightly, their presence suddenly more noticeable. My parents' expressions cycled through shock, anger, and finally the beginning of fear. What do you want? My father finally asked, his voice hollow. I want the truth acknowledged, I replied steadily. Grandpa built something meaningful, something that supports hundreds of people and serves this community. He entrusted it to me because he believed I would honor those commitments. I stood, placing both hands on the table. As of today, I am the legal owner of this house, controlling shareholder of Mitchell Enterprises, and beneficiary of all associated trusts and investments. Your renovations stop immediately. Your access to company accounts has been terminated, and your plans for the development that would displace the Pine Street neighborhood are permanently canceled. My mother began to cry. Calculated tears. I had seen manipulate people my entire life. How could you do this to us? We gave you everything. No, I countered quietly. Grandpa gave me everything, including the clarity to see you both for who you truly are. My father pushed back from the table violently. You think you can run a multi-million-dollar business empire? You're a school teacher. You'll destroy everything Harold built within months. Miss Bennett cleared her throat. Actually, Isabella has already demonstrated remarkable business acumen in our preliminary meetings. Her focus on ethical practices and community investment aligns perfectly with the company's founding principles. This revelation seemed to wound my father more deeply than anything else, the suggestion that I might succeed where he had never been trusted to try. You have 2 choices, I continued. Option 1, contest. The trust spend years in expensive litigation. You will ultimately lose and destroy whatever remains of your reputation in this community. Option 2, accept Grandpa's decision, maintain a limited relationship with me on my terms, and perhaps salvage something meaningful from this situation. Your terms, my mother spat. Who do you think you are? I'm Harold Mitchell's granddaughter, I replied simply. And these are my terms. You will seek therapy to address the patterns of manipulation and emotional abuse that have characterized our relationship. You will make formal apologies to the people you have maligned during this process, including me, and you will respect the boundaries I establish regarding Mitchell Enterprises and my personal life. The silence that followed was deafening. My parents exchanged glances, a wordless communication honed by decades of partnership in their particular brand of social warfare. And if we agree to these terms, my father finally asked, then I will establish a trust that provides you with a reasonable income for your lifetime, nowhere near what you expected, but enough to live comfortably. You will retain limited visitation rights to family properties, and we can begin the long process of rebuilding whatever relationship might be possible between us." I paused, then added firmly, "But understand this. Your days of manipulating, threatening, and intimidating me are over, forever." My mother's tears had stopped abruptly, calculation replacing distress. "And our social standing, what will people think when they learn we've been disinherited?" Of course, that would be her primary concern. "That depends entirely on how you choose to behave from this point forward. Dignity in adversity tends to earn respect." My father stood suddenly. "This discussion is over. Come, Eleanor. Our attorneys will be in touch." As they moved toward the door, I delivered the final revelation. "One more thing you should know. Grandpa didn't leave you, just the fishing equipment. There was an additional bequest not mentioned at the will reading." They paused, unable to resist this dangling thread of hope. "He left you his collection of books on ethical business practices and family psychology. They're boxed up in the library. You can take them on your way out. They might prove useful in the months ahead." The look of stunned humiliation on their faces contained no satisfaction for me, only the sad confirmation of everything Grandpa had foreseen. They left without another word, the champagne bottle abandoned on the table, like their shattered expectations. After the door closed behind them, Mr. Daniels approached me. "Your grandfather would have been proud of how you handled that, Isabella. You were firm but fair, offering reconciliation alongside accountability." "Do you think they'll accept?" Maria asked, already knowing the answer. "Not immediately," I admitted. "Their pride won't allow it. But perhaps someday, when the reality of their situation fully sinks in." I moved to the window, watching my parents' luxury car pull away from the house that was now indisputably mine. Their headlights cut through the gathering darkness as they drove away from the legacy they had coveted but never understood. "Now comes the hard part," I murmured, more to myself than to those still in the room. "Living up to Grandpa's faith in me." The 6 months following my confrontation with my parents unfolded in ways I never could have imagined. The practical realities of inheriting a business empire while maintaining my identity and values proved challenging, but ultimately rewarding. My first decision surprised everyone. I would continue teaching 3rd grade at Lincoln Elementary. Despite the protests from financial advisors who couldn't comprehend why a multimillionaire would want to spend her days managing classroom behavior and grading spelling tests, I knew that my work with children grounded me in what mattered. "Your grandfather built his company while running a construction crew," I reminded the bewildered board of directors during our first meeting. "I can build the future of Mitchell Enterprises while teaching multiplication tables." We compromised with a part-time teaching schedule that allowed me to handle business responsibilities 3 days a week. My principal, Sandra, after recovering from the shock of learning about my inheritance, worked with me to create a job-sharing arrangement with another teacher. "Just promise me you won't donate so much to the school that the board names it after you," she joked. "The paperwork would be a nightmare." My students, blissfully unaware of my financial situation, continued treating me as simply Miss Mitchell, who sometimes brought homemade cookies and always had extra pencils. Their uncomplicated acceptance provided a sanctuary from the complexity that now characterized the rest of my life. The most unexpected development came 2 months after assuming control of Mitchell Enterprises. While volunteering at a community garden project the company sponsored, I met Nathan Harris, an environmental engineer who had designed the irrigation system. Tall, with perpetually dirt-smudged hands and an easy laugh, Nathan approached me with a technical question, assuming I was just another volunteer. "You'll want to talk to whoever's in charge of the Mitchell Foundation funding," he advised, when I asked about expanding the project to other neighborhoods. "I hear the new owner is actually approachable, unlike the previous management." The irony made me smile. "I might have an in with her," I replied cryptically, enjoying this rare interaction with someone who had no preconceptions about me. We worked side by side for hours, planting vegetables and discussing sustainable urban development. Not once did he ask about my personal life or background, a refreshing change from the social climbers, who had suddenly discovered my existence once news of my inheritance spread. Only when Sophia Bennett arrived with documents needing my signature did Nathan realize who I was. His expression of genuine embarrassment, rather than calculated interest, told me everything about his character. "I would have worn a cleaner shirt if I'd known I was talking to the CEO," he joked, indicating the mud-splattered state of his clothing. "I'm not technically the CEO," I corrected, "and I prefer the dirty shirt. It's honest." Nathan became a friend first offering perspective, untainted by family history or financial interest. Our relationship developed slowly, built on shared values rather than shared circumstances. By the 5th month, friendship had evolved into something deeper, though we both proceeded cautiously. "I Googled you, you know," he admitted during our 3rd dinner date. "After I figured out who you were, the news articles about the Mitchell inheritance drama make for quite a story." "Is that a problem?" I asked, suddenly tense. He considered this seriously. "It would be dishonest to say your situation doesn't intimidate me a little, but I was raised to believe that a person should be judged by their actions, not their bank account, whether it's empty or full." His sincerity, coupled with his complete lack of interest in leveraging our relationship for personal gain, made Nathan a steadying presence as I navigated my new reality. Professionally, I found unexpected fulfillment in reshaping Grandpa's company according to my own vision while honoring his principles. My background in education brought fresh perspectives to corporate culture. We established a scholarship program for employees' children, expanded parental leave policies, and launched a mentorship initiative, pairing experienced staff with at-risk youth. Most significantly, I canceled my parents' planned development that would have displaced the historic Pine Street neighborhood. Instead, we worked with community leaders to create affordable housing renovations that preserved the area's character while improving living conditions. The project became a model for ethical urban development, earning accolades from city officials, and more importantly, the gratitude of families who had lived there for generations. Not all transitions were smooth. Several longtime executives resigned, rather than report to Harold's schoolteacher granddaughter. Their departures created space for promoting talented employees who shared my values but had been overlooked in the previous hierarchy. Sophia Bennett, once the assistant financial controller, flourished as CFO, bringing both technical expertise and ethical clarity to our financial decisions. "Your grandfather hired me 15 years ago when no one would take a chance on a single mother with gaps in her resume," she confided during a late-night planning session. "He said, 'Potential matters more than pedigree. I see that same quality in you.'" Her words touched me deeply, affirming that I was indeed carrying forward something essential of Grandpa's legacy. As for my parents, their response to their diminished circumstances unfolded predictably. They initially pursued their threat of legal action, filing petitions, challenging the trust's validity. When their attorneys reviewed the ironclad documentation Mr. Daniels had prepared, most counseled them to accept the settlement I had offered, rather than waste resources on unwinnable litigation. After 2 months of legal posturing, they reluctantly withdrew their claims. Shortly thereafter, they sold their luxury home and relocated to Florida, spreading tales of family betrayal to anyone who would listen. Their social circle gradually contracted as their reduced circumstances and bitter attitudes made them less attractive companions to their status-conscious friends. Occasionally, my mother would attempt reconciliation on her terms, always involving financial requests, disguised as family overtures. "We only want what's best for you, Isabella," she would write in carefully worded emails. "Families should support each other, especially financially." I maintained the boundaries I had established, responding with polite but firm reminders of the conditions for rebuilding our relationship. Their refusal to consider therapy or acknowledge their behavior kept us at an impasse that seemed unlikely to resolve soon. The most healing aspect of this period came through reconnecting with extended family members who reached out independently after learning the full story. Aunt Judith, who had initially condemned me based on my parents' version of events, arrived at my office one afternoon without appointment. "I owe you an apology," she said simply. "I believed what Richard and Eleanor told me without question, despite knowing how they operate. Harold always said you were the one who truly understood him. I should have remembered that." Our reconciliation brought back warm memories of childhood holidays and shared family stories. Through Judith, I reconnected with cousins and other relatives who had distanced themselves during the inheritance conflict, but now sought authentic family bonds. By the 6-month mark, Mitchell Enterprises was thriving under the new direction. Employee satisfaction reached record highs, community partnerships strengthened, and ironically, profits increased, proving that ethical business practices could indeed be financially sound. The Victorian house slowly transformed back to reflect Grandpa's warm traditional aesthetic rather than my parents' cold modernism. Maria returned as housekeeper, bringing with her the comfortable familiarity of someone who had known me since childhood. We reinstated Sunday baking sessions in the kitchen, often with neighborhood children, joining us to learn Grandpa's treasured bread recipe. One evening, as Nathan and I sat on the porch swing that had been returned to its rightful place, I found myself telling him about those Sunday afternoons with Grandpa. He always said that bread making teaches you everything important about life. I explained, demonstrating the kneading motion with my hands. You need patience, attention to detail, and faith that things will rise in their own time. Nathan listened thoughtfully. Sounds like he was preparing you for this inheritance long before he planned it, teaching you to handle things that require patience and faith. His observation struck me profoundly. Perhaps Grandpa's lessons had never been just about bread, or fishing, or star constellations. Perhaps everything had been preparation for the responsibility he knew would eventually be mine. That night, looking at the business proposals on my desk, alongside third-grade science projects, waiting to be graded, I felt a sense of alignment I hadn't experienced since before Grandpa's death. The path forward wasn't about choosing between teacher and business leader. It was about bringing the best of both worlds together, just as Grandpa had brought together his humble beginnings and later success. I was Harold Mitchell's granddaughter, but I was also becoming my own person, Isabella, who baked bread on Sundays and approved corporate budgets on Mondays, who valued both education and enterprise, who had learned that the truest inheritance wasn't in bank accounts, but in the values that guided how those resources were used. 2 years passed like a whisper and a shout simultaneously, days blending together in routine, while major life changes punctuated the journey with exclamation points. Looking back from this vantage point, I barely recognized the bewildered young woman who had watched her inheritance burn in a wastebasket, yet I carried her with me in every step forward. The Mitchell Foundation, established 6 months after I took control of Grandpa's estate, had grown into a respected community institution. We focused on educational access for underserved populations, affordable housing initiatives, and elder care programs, 3 areas Grandpa had supported quietly throughout his life. What once began as anonymous donations from a private citizen now operated as a structured organization, employing 15 passionate individuals dedicated to extending Harold Mitchell's legacy of practical compassion. Lincoln Elementary still saw me 3 mornings each week, though my role had evolved from classroom teacher to curriculum specialist, allowing me to impact more children while balancing my business responsibilities. My students from that first difficult year after Grandpa's death were now 5th graders who occasionally visited my classroom to share updates on their progress. Their resilience and growth mirrored my own, in ways that continually reminded me why I refused to abandon education despite my changed circumstances. Mitchell Enterprises transformed under collaborative leadership. Rather than positioning myself as the all-knowing CEO, I assembled a team of experts who shared decision-making authority within their domains. This approach freed me to focus on big-picture direction, while honoring the specialized knowledge of those who had dedicated their careers to various aspects of the business. Our employee ownership program, implemented on the first anniversary of my inheritance, gave every staff member a tangible stake in the company's success. The most surprising development came from an unexpected quarter. After 18 months of stubbornness and hostility, my parents reached a breaking point. Their funds dwindling and their social network frayed, they finally accepted the terms I had established for reconciliation. Their first therapy session, according to the counselor, they permitted to share limited information with me, consisted mainly of justifications and blame shifting. But persistent work over many months gradually yielded genuine insights. "Your father cried today," Dr. Martinez reported during one of our periodic updates. Not manipulative tears, but the kind that come from recognizing 40 years of misplaced priorities. My mother's progress came more slowly, her identity so thoroughly entwined with social status that dismantling those patterns required more intensive work. Yet even she eventually acknowledged behaviors that had damaged our relationship beyond simple repair. 8 months into their therapy journey, we attempted our first in-person meeting on neutral ground, a private room at a restaurant with Dr. Martinez present to facilitate. The conversation was awkward, tentative, and nothing like the easy reconciliation portrayed in movies, but it was honest in a way our interactions had never been. "I don't know how to be a mother without controlling you," my mother admitted, in a rare moment of vulnerability. "I never learned any other way." "And I don't know how to be your daughter without disappointing you," I responded. "But perhaps we can both learn something new." We established careful boundaries, monthly dinners, with clear time limits, neutral topics of conversation, and no discussion of financial matters without Dr. Martinez present. These structured interactions slowly evolved into something resembling a healthy parent-child relationship, though the scars remained visible beneath the surface. My father, to everyone's surprise, including his own, discovered an aptitude for mentoring young entrepreneurs through a program established by the Mitchell Foundation. Channeling his business knowledge without the toxicity of status seeking provided him purpose beyond accumulation. My mother volunteered reluctantly at a women's shelter as part of her therapy program, only to find unexpected fulfillment in helping others rebuild their lives after crisis. "I was raised to believe that worth came from appearance and association," she explained during our 6th dinner. "Watching these women find strength in themselves, despite having none of the advantages I took for granted, it changes something fundamental in how you see the world. We would never be the picture-perfect family, and complete trust might remain forever beyond reach. But we found a new equilibrium based on respect rather than obligation, a relationship chosen rather than merely inherited." Throughout this period of family reconstruction, Nathan remained my steadfast partner. Our relationship deepened through shared values and mutual support rather than dramatic passion. He understood my need for independence after years of parental control, never pushing for more commitment than I was ready to give. When he finally proposed, it was with characteristic thoughtfulness. "I'm not asking to share your fortune," he said, presenting a simple ring he had designed himself. "I'm asking to share your journey, the difficulties and the joys, the doubts and the certainties. The person you are becoming, and the person I am becoming alongside you." We married in Grandpa's garden, a small ceremony, with only those who had proven their authentic care for us. Mr. Daniels walked me down the aisle, his usually composed demeanor breaking briefly as he whispered Harold would be bursting with pride today. My parents attended as guests, rather than central figures, a position they accepted with grace that would have been impossible 2 years earlier. The photograph of us together, slightly awkward, but genuinely trying, sat on my desk as a reminder that healing comes in imperfect but meaningful increments. As my personal and professional lives stabilized into their new forms, I often reflected on what Grandpa had truly left me. The money and businesses, substantial as they were, paled in comparison to the wisdom that guided my use of those resources. The inheritance that mattered most was his understanding that wealth creates obligation rather than privilege, that character outlasts currency, and that true legacy lives in impact rather than accumulation. I established a tradition of writing annual letters to Grandpa, updating him on the stewardship of his legacy. These private reflections helped me process the ongoing journey and reconnect with his guidance when decisions became particularly challenging. Dear Grandpa, 2 years have passed since you orchestrated the greatest lesson of my life through that burning check. What seemed like a moment of loss became the foundation for everything that followed. The company you built now provides parental leave benefits that allow parents to be present for their children's early years. The employees who feared my leadership now bring their ideas directly to our collaborative planning sessions. The community garden project has expanded to 15 locations throughout the city, feeding hundreds of families, including some of my own students. Nathan sends his regards. He thinks you would have approved of the irrigation system he designed for the memorial park bearing your name. I know you would have approved of his integrity, which reminds me so much of yours. Mom and Dad are trying in their way. The journey isn't simple or complete, but it's genuine. Dad mentioned a fishing trip you took him on when he was 12, a memory I'd never heard him recall before. There was longing in his voice when he described how you taught him to tie flies. Perhaps some lessons take decades to fully learn. I still make your bread recipe every Sunday. The house fills with that same smell I remember from childhood, and for a moment, it feels like you might walk through the door flour on your hands, ready to check if the dough has risen properly. In those moments, I understand that you never really left. Your wisdom rises in me when needed just as surely as the bread rises in the oven. The money you left me opened doors, but the values you taught me determined which ones I walked through. That remains the truest inheritance, the ability to discern what matters, to recognize genuine connection, and to use resources for purpose, rather than power. I hope I'm making you proud. With eternal gratitude, your Bella. 2 years after watching my parents burn what they thought was my future, I understood that Grandpa's greatest gift wasn't financial security, but the freedom to define success on my own terms. He had created a test that revealed the true character of everyone, involved myself included, and prepared me to handle the results with grace rather than bitterness. The journey from that attorney's office to today involved pain adjustment and profound growth. The wounds inflicted by family betrayal hadn't disappeared, but had transformed into sources of wisdom and discernment. I learned to recognize authentic relationships, to establish healthy boundaries, and to extend compassion without sacrificing self-respect. Most importantly, I discovered that true wealth isn't measured in millions, but in meaning. The lives improved, the communities strengthened, and the values transmitted to future generations. That was Grandpa's real legacy, and now it was mine to carry forward. What my parents burned that day wasn't my inheritance at all. It was their last illusion of control over my life and Grandpa's legacy. In its place rose something far more valuable: the clarity to see people for who they truly are, the courage to protect what matters, and the wisdom to build something meaningful from the ashes of disappointment. Have you ever experienced a moment when someone's true character was revealed in a crisis? How did it change your perspective on that relationship? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and if this story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to hear that sometimes what looks like losing something valuable can actually be the beginning of finding something priceless. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your worth is never determined by what others think of you, but by the integrity with which you face life's challenges.